That night Elvis left the stage, dropped the microphone, and did something that stunned his fans. In front of 50,000 screaming fans at the Louisiana Superdome, the king of rock and roll stopped everything. The music died, the lights dimmed, and an arena full of people held their breath as Elvis Presley pointed directly at one man in the crowd. What happened next would become one of the most powerful moments in music history, a moment that revealed the true heart of a man who was much more than just an entertainer. But how did we get to this extraordinary moment? How did a regular concert turn into something that would be talked about for decades? The answer lies in understanding who Elvis really was beneath the glittering jumpsuits and the fame. Because what you're about to hear isn't just about music, it's about humanity, compassion, and the power of one person to touch another's life when they need it most. Subscribe now because you're about to witness a side of Elvis Presley that will change everything you thought you knew about the king. The date was August 16, 1977, exactly 1 year before Elvis would leave this world. The Louisiana Superdome in New Orleans was packed beyond capacity. 50,000 people had traveled from across the country to see the king perform what many sensed might be one of his final tours. The energy was electric, the anticipation palpable. Elvis walked onto that stage wearing his iconic white jumpsuit, the one with the golden eagle spread across the chest. At 42, he was heavier than his younger days, but his voice still carried that magic that had transformed American music forever. The crowd erupted as he grabbed the microphone, and for the first hour, it was vintage Elvis, Jailhouse Rock, Hound Dog, Can't Help Falling in Love. But there was something different about Elvis that night. Those who knew him could see it. His movements were more deliberate, his gaze more searching. Between songs, he would pause and scan the audience, really looking at the faces before him. It was as if he was trying to connect with each and every person in that massive arena. In the front section, about 20 rows back, stood a man named Robert Mitchell. He was 45 years old, a factory worker from a small town in Mississippi. Robert had saved for months to afford this ticket. He'd driven 8 hours to New Orleans, alone, carrying with him a pain so deep it threatened to consume him. 3 weeks earlier, his son Tommy, just 19 years old, had been killed in a car accident. Tommy had been Elvis's biggest fan, knew every song by heart, dreamed of one day seeing the king perform live. Robert hadn't wanted to come. The ticket had been Tommy's birthday present, something they were supposed to experience together. But Robert's wife had insisted. Tommy would want you to go, she had said. He'd want you to sing those songs for him. So there Robert stood, surrounded by joy and celebration, carrying a grief so heavy he could barely breathe. Elvis suddenly stopped mid-sentence during "Love Me Tender." The entire arena fell into a deathly silence. Something had caught the king's attention. From the stage, Elvis's eyes had found Robert Mitchell in the crowd. Maybe it was the way Robert stood perfectly still while everyone around him swayed and sang. Maybe it was the tears streaming down his face, visible even from that distance. Or maybe, as some would later say, it was something more mystical, a connection that transcended the physical space between performer and audience. Elvis raised his hand, and the band stopped playing. 50,000 people fell silent, confused, wondering what was happening. The king had never done anything like this before. He was known for his energy, his movement, his connection with the crowd, but this was different. This was unprecedented. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said into the microphone, his voice softer than usual, "I need everyone to be quiet for just a moment." His eyes never left Robert Mitchell. "There's someone here tonight who needs our attention." The silence was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. In the massive Superdome, with its soaring ceiling and endless rows of seats, the only sound was the gentle hum of the lighting equipment. Elvis began walking across the stage, still looking directly at Robert. "Sir," Elvis called out, pointing now. "You there in the blue shirt?" "Yes, you." Robert looked around, certain Elvis couldn't be talking to him. But the king's finger was pointed straight at him, and every eye in the arena had turned to follow that gesture. Elvis set down his microphone and walked to the edge of the stage. "What's your name, friend?" he called out. Robert was trembling now, overwhelmed by the attention, by the grief, by the impossibility of this moment. Robert, he managed to call back, his voice barely audible. Robert, Elvis repeated, and somehow his voice carried across the arena without amplification. I can see you're hurting, son. Do you want to tell us about it? Behind the scenes, Elvis's team was in complete shock at what their boss was doing. The band members looked at each other in confusion. Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, was frantically trying to figure out how to get the show back on track. The arena management was worried about schedule delays, about the logistics of a concert that had suddenly become something entirely different. But Elvis didn't care about any of that. He had seen something in Robert Mitchell's face that reminded him of his own pain, his own losses, his own struggles with fame and loneliness. The king of rock and roll had become, in that moment, simply a human being reaching out to another human being in pain. Come on up here, Robert, Elvis said, gesturing toward the stage. Don't be afraid. These are good people here tonight. Security guards started to move, uncertain about protocol, but Elvis waved them off. Let him through, he commanded. Let him come up. The crowd began to murmur, some confused, others sensing they were witnessing something special. Robert Mitchell, still in shock, began making his way toward the stage, people stepping aside to create a path for him. As he got closer, Elvis knelt down at the edge of the stage, bringing himself to eye level with the grieving father. What's weighing on your heart, Robert? Elvis asked, his voice so gentle it brought tears to eyes throughout the arena. You don't have to carry it alone. Robert looked up at Elvis, this man who was larger than life, this icon who had just stopped everything for him, a nobody from Mississippi. And in that moment, the dam burst. My son, Robert sobbed. My boy Tommy. He died 3 weeks ago. He loved you so much, Elvis. This was supposed to be his birthday present. We were supposed to be here together. The arena was so quiet that everyone could hear Robert's words. 50,000 people became witnesses to one man's grief, to the rawest human emotion. Many in the crowd began crying themselves, feeling the weight of Robert's loss. Elvis's eyes filled with tears. Without hesitation, he jumped down from the stage, something his security team had nightmares about, and embraced Robert Mitchell. Right there in front of everyone, the king of rock and roll held a broken father while he cried. Tommy's here tonight, Elvis whispered in Robert's ear, loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear. Can you feel him? He's here with us. He's hearing every note, seeing every moment. Your boy brought you here, Robert. He made sure you didn't miss this. The crowd began to understand what was happening. This wasn't just a concert anymore. This was something sacred, something that transcended entertainment and touched the very essence of human connection. But here's the incredible part of this story. The part nobody expected. Elvis looked up at the crowd, still holding Robert, and he began to sing. Not into a microphone, not amplified by speakers, just his natural voice carrying across the arena. He sang, He Touched Me, a gospel song that had always been close to his heart. His voice, raw with emotion, filled the Superdome with a power that no amplification could match. One by one, people in the crowd began to join in. First those closest to the stage, then row by row, the singing spread throughout the arena. 50,000 voices united in a song of comfort, of healing, of shared humanity. It was as if the entire building had become a church, with Elvis as the pastor and Robert Mitchell as the congregation member who needed prayer. As they sang, Elvis reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small and silver. It was a cross necklace, one he had worn for years, a gift from his mother Gladys before she died. He placed it around Robert's neck. This was my mama's, Elvis said. She gave it to me before she passed. Now it's yours. Every time you miss Tommy, you touch this cross and remember, love doesn't die, Robert. It just changes form. Your boy is still with you. The song ended, but the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, pregnant with emotion and meaning. Elvis helped Robert back to his feet, and together they walked to the stage. Elvis climbed back up and offered his hand to pull Robert up with him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis announced to the crowd, "I want you to meet my friend Robert Mitchell from Mississippi. He lost his son Tommy 3 weeks ago, and Tommy was supposed to be here tonight. So I'm going to ask all of you to do something for me. I'm going to sing Tommy's favorite song, and I want every one of you to sing it like Tommy's listening. Because he is." Elvis picked up his microphone and began the opening notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love." But this time, it wasn't a performance. It was a prayer, a celebration of life, a tribute to a young man who would never hear his hero sing but whose spirit filled every note. The entire arena sang along. Not just the words, but with their hearts, their souls, their own memories of loss and love. Robert stood next to Elvis on that stage, tears flowing freely, but for the first time in 3 weeks, he was smiling. He could feel Tommy there, could imagine his son's joy at seeing his dad on stage with Elvis Presley. When the song ended, Elvis embraced Robert one more time. "You're going to be okay," he whispered. "And whenever you need to remember that, you touch that cross." Elvis helped Robert down from the stage, and the concert continued. But everyone knew that what they had just witnessed was more than entertainment. It was a glimpse into the soul of a man who understood that fame and fortune meant nothing if you couldn't use them to ease someone else's pain. The cross that Elvis gave Robert Mitchell that night became more than just a piece of jewelry. Robert wore it every day for the rest of his life. When Elvis died exactly 1 year later, Robert traveled to Memphis to pay his respects, wearing the cross that connected him forever to the king. He told reporters gathered there about that night in New Orleans, about how Elvis had saved him from drowning in his grief. The story spread, and over the years, it became one of the most beloved Elvis legends. But for Robert, it was never just a story. It was the moment when his hero revealed himself to be something even more precious, a human being who cared. Robert Mitchell lived until 2003, and in his final interview, he was asked about that night in 1977. "People talk about Elvis the entertainer, Elvis the icon," he said, fingering the cross that still hung around his neck. "But I knew Elvis the man. And the man was bigger than the legend." Today, that cross sits in a place of honor in the Elvis Presley Museum in Memphis. Visitors often stop to read the plaque that tells Robert and Tommy's story. Many leave flowers, notes, and their own tokens of remembrance. Because Elvis's act of compassion that night did more than comfort one grieving father, it reminded the world that true greatness isn't measured in record sales or sold-out concerts, but in moments of human connection. Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977, exactly 1 year after that concert in New Orleans. But the memory of that night, when the king stopped everything for one broken heart, lives on. It reminds us that in our darkest moments, sometimes a stranger's kindness can be the light that guides us home. The impact of that night rippled far beyond the Superdome walls. News of Elvis's spontaneous act of compassion spread through word of mouth, then through newspapers and radio stations across the country. Letters poured into Graceland from fans who had been inspired by the story. Many shared their own experiences of loss, of moments when a stranger's kindness had lifted them from despair. Elvis himself was profoundly changed by the encounter with Robert Mitchell. Those close to him noticed a shift in his performances during his final year. He spent more time between songs talking to the audience, really looking at individual faces. He began dedicating songs to people who had written him letters about their struggles. The man who had always been generous with his time and money became even more attuned to the pain of others. In interviews during those last months, Elvis spoke often about the power of music to heal. "Music isn't just entertainment," he told a reporter in Memphis just weeks before his death. "It's medicine for the soul. When someone is hurting, the right song at the right moment can save their life. I've seen it happen." The cross necklace became a symbol that transcended its religious meaning. For Robert, it represented the moment when his faith in humanity was restored. For Elvis, giving it away was an act of passing on the love his mother had given him. And for the thousands who heard the story, it became proof that genuine compassion still existed in a world that often seemed cold and indifferent. Years later, music historians would analyze that night in New Orleans as a perfect example of Elvis's unique ability to connect with his audience on a deeply personal level. But for Robert Mitchell, it was never about music history or cultural significance. It was about the night a stranger became a friend, and grief transformed into healing. The recording of that concert, with the interruption intact, was never officially released during Elvis's lifetime. The Presley estate considered it too personal, too raw for commercial distribution. But bootleg recordings circulated among fans, and the story grew into legend. Today, audio clips of Elvis singing "Can't Help Falling in Love" with Robert on stage are considered among the most emotionally powerful performances in the King's catalog. When Robert Mitchell passed away in 2003, his family honored his final wish. He was buried wearing the cross Elvis had given him, taking with him to eternity the tangible reminder of that extraordinary night when compassion conquered performance, when humanity trumped showmanship, and when the king of rock and roll proved that his greatest gift wasn't his voice, it was his heart. Share this story if you believe in the power of human compassion. Subscribe to keep these memories alive. Because some moments are too beautiful to forget, and some acts of kindness are too important to let fade away.